What's going on, beautiful J4 family? So good to see you. Welcome to another edition of J4 Conversations. Tonight's conversation is parents of biracial children. That's the audience I want to talk to. Let's chop. Identity expressions through names, mantras, and hair. Appreciate you guys joining me. I hope your Sunday has been wonderful, that you've had your Sunday routine and ritual, perhaps cleaned up your house to your favorite music and that you're feeling kind of grooved in and are enjoying the day. But more important, I want to thank you for coming over and spending a little bit of time as we talk about this important conversation around parenting, motherhood, fatherhood, however that ensemble of parenting dynamics work, whether it's two parent homes or single mom, single dad. Hey, it is a critically important role. Before I begin, I want to say a special thank you to recent subscribers. I've seen some energy in the J4 conversation space, and that's always nice for the old man to kind of wake up and see some activity on the page. And I truly appreciate that. I don't want to take your time, interest, and subscribe or like whatever the case may be for granted. So I wanted to say publicly here, thank you guys so much. If you're coming in, definitely hit that like button, either like or dislike, whatever the configuration is. But it helps. It helps the algorithm sort of build energy, build momentum as I seek to grow this page. So the purpose of J4 Conversation historically has been two fathers and two sons chopping it up about life, largely an intergenerational conversation for two sons who were 18 years old, going to college and wanting to talk about competencies, things that they ought to know as a young man, things that they ought to know as an individual sort of coming of age and leaving the house and beginning their own sense of independence. And so the parenting aspect doesn't necessarily stop when your beautiful seeds leave the proverbial nest, because that parenting still continues and eventually goes from high dependency to more parent mentor kind of thing. But since we've been in activity here about a year or so, we've also on occasion do some J4 solo dolo stuff, and that's what this is here tonight. And so I appreciate you guys joining me. Love to know who we're conversing with, especially if there's some parents in the audience here. Love to know what your racial background is. If you have a child, if that's a son or a daughter, maybe what their age is, and certainly any questions that you all might have. The reason this conversation is important to me, the reason it's important to me is because 51% of our babies, when I say that, I mean African American babies, are born to single parent home situations. And that's a problem, y'all. That's a problem. And so much of this page is devoted to father strategies, to include support mechanisms for each other, general fun banter among pops. We need that in our life. We need confidants. We need mentors. We need advisors. We need sounding boards. And so that's kind of what the space is. But it has since grown to a more narrow moment because of a presentation I did with a friend of mine called White Mothers and Their Black Biracial Sons. And that thing, in terms of my world, is just blown up. It has over 3,000 kind of views. But in that process, I discovered some new voices, y'all. I discovered some new voices. My orientation to the world as a biracial kid was biracial folks sort of leaned and sought membership within a black monolith, within a black cultural space. And that is my reality. It is my life lived, and is where I found a home, social connection, and much joy, inspiration, and collegiality. My entire existence almost evolves around relevancy to black spaces and uplift. But I discovered some new voices, some young people who were expressing frustration when interacting in black spaces, some folks feeling attacked, feeling unwelcomed. And I said, man, I didn't know, man. I just did not know. And as I was just kind of perusing and doing some research, I discovered that there's also a faction within the YouTube sphere where black folks are also sort of saying that biracial folks aren't black. And so I had an intergenerational pause, y'all. I had an intergenerational pause. I had to sit down and sort of think about this, what the heck is going on, in part because I am a father of 6 children who, in terms of percentage, they're more black than I am, but they present biracial. And I was very curious as to how they were being received in the world. And I surveyed them. They weren't having sort of this disconnect, this incongruency that I'm seeing kind of in some of the other spaces, largely the golden sphere. But that, nonetheless, that doesn't not negate that it might not be the absolute truth or certainly their reality. And so there's a lot to think about here, particularly because the percentage of interracial marriages are going up. The percentage of babies born of biracial identity is going up. And so there's going to need to be some intentionality in how we rear, raise, and prepare beautiful biracial children to go out into the world, to make their mark, to be relevant to it, but to do it in a way where they feel a healthy sense of who they are. That's ultimately what this channel is about producing young people who are healthy, solid, grounded, and are able to manage their own life. So before we begin, welcome, welcome, welcome. Let me know who's in the boxes. Good to see you all. Appreciate y'all coming in. Today's topic is identity expression through names, mantras, and hair. All right. Parents definitely want to hear from you, see what your experiences are, particularly in this space. But before we begin, let's talk about the numbers, y'all. Let's chop it up about the numbers. All right. There's over 350 million people in the United States of America. All right. That's 2022 data. And then in the 2000 census, you have two or more races that hits the census in a sort of defined contemporary kind of way. Although I did learn there was a mulatto distinction in 1790. Starting in the 1940s, the U.S. Census had other kind of categories. Starting in the 1960s, you went from enumerators looking outward and labeling you to the first mail-out ballot where you could then identify yourself. And there was some opportunities, particularly in the long form, where you could indicate some complexity of who you are in terms of heritage makeup. But in 2000, voices were raised, the census took a different turn and acknowledged the reality that folks have either two or more races or multi-generational races or are mixed in a whole different kind of variation. And so today, 10% of that 350 million, y'all, 10%. This is up considerably from when I was born in 1967. The percentage of people who had two or more races was 1%. In 1967, the earliest data set that I came across in terms of the percentage of folks who are biracial or two or more races was 1%. 1%. Today, the population represents itself as 10% or 33.8 million. This lets us know the percentage is growing, and therefore the impact on the broader society is going to be vastly different than it was when the numbers were so minuscule. They weren't even sort of blips on the data set, right? This is critically important for interracial marriages because you're producing a child in the 21st century that is going to have larger percentages of like configuration in terms of identity makeup. And as evidence is showing, they're beginning to talk and chatter and banter in different kind of ways than perhaps my generation, right? And time is inevitable. Things change typically over generations. A generation is articulated as 25 years. What's good, Mulatto Vanguard? How you doing, brother? Good to see you. I see your name change. All right. So the numbers are increasing, all right? It's up from 1% in 19... okay. So in terms of marriages, right now, there's 17% of all newlyweds in 2015 were interracial marriages. 17% of newlyweds in 2015 were interracial marriages. That's up from the latter part of the 60s, where it was about 3%. Okay, about 3%. So we've seen an exponential growth over a 5-decade period where people are beginning to reject old historical notions around interracial marriage. In fact, in 1968, I believe, when I was born, the acceptance or approval of interracial marriages was about 20%, to where now it's 94%. We're living in a different era. Biracial kids are responding differently on different kind of things. Mulatto, I respect your articulation on these biracial matters. Appreciate that, brother. Appreciate that. Appreciate that. So in 1967, 3% marriages, roughly latter part of the 60s, 20% approval rate of interracial marriages. Today it's 94%, and the number of newlyweds is 17%. This thing is going up. In fact, the only cultural group that is going declining in terms of the percentage of interracial marriages are people who identify as Asian Pacific Americans. They're the only ones, okay? All the rest of the configurations, Native American, American Indian, Black, Hispanic, other cultural groups, that is exponentially going up, 17% as we mark it now in 2015, okay? Of all marriages, 10% of all marriages are interracial. So that means biracial babies are coming and they're not going to stop. They're not going to stop. And so the question, beautiful family, is how are you going to raise them? Beautiful family, how are you going to raise your biracial child who already is uniquely and distinctively different than you? Most of this conversation typically makes some assumptions around Black fathers, white mothers, mothers of other cultural communities, right? That's not the sole configuration of that. In fact, if you look at the 17% of those who are in interracial marriages, or 10%, and you then stratify that as a category, about 11% are Black-white. 11% are Black-white mix, okay? That is going to increase. How are you going to raise them? A core parental responsibility is to take intentionality in raising your beautiful seeds and to think about them when they're 5, when they're 10, when they're 15, when they're 20. Think about them when they're grown human beings, because their capacity to function independently as a grown human being is tied to how we engage, teach, and parent them from the womb. From the womb. This is undeniable. Parents, we have multiple areas of influence, but 4 key areas that we have influence on. Mulatto, he's in here with me. He's always riding. I appreciate you, Mulatto. Biracial people are here to stay. They're here to stay, but the question is, what are they going to become, right? Parents have influence upon these dynamics and these factors. You have influence on their character, right? What is their respect factors? How do they move through rooms? How do they engage peers? How do they interact with adults, right? What is their character, right? You're always correcting and redirecting and making adjustments when you see things in their personality at a young age that you don't quite like. You're emphasizing things that you find value in, that you think are good things that represent family value. You encourage that, you praise that, you reward that, and then you quickly address issues that you don't think are becoming of the beautiful seed. Might be character flaws, might be a selfishness, might be a tendency to lie and to fabricate and to fib. Might be a dynamic where you're showing aggression in spaces where that might not make sense, right? Character is an area where you influence. You also influence their life lived largely through socioeconomics, right? What provision can you provide, right? What kind of progressive earnings through employment, through entrepreneurialism, through inheritance, whatever the case may be, right? But what kind of life do you create for them? What kind of resources, co-curricular activities, what kind of nutrition, all of those things tied into economics. Parents are the designers of that. You manage all that, right? And then, of course, education. One of your biggest decisions is where are you going to send your babies to school so that they can get this knowledge, they can get this information, and they can begin to take on sort of an intellectual life. This is solely within the lap of parents, right? And this, what will be your influence upon them culturally? How will you influence them culturally? Because what the babies are exposed to, what the beautiful young people are exposed to, comes from what mom and dad exposed them to. So in essence, there's an intentionality on mom's part, there's an intentionality on dad's part to plant the seeds as to what cultural awareness, cultural involvement, cultural membership is your child going to at least begin in. So at some point, you're influencing that. At some point, they'll get an assessment of it, they'll read it, they'll get a sense of it, maybe they'll continue in whatever you set in motion, or maybe as a grown person with life lived and experiences, they'll make other kinds of decisions, right? They'll make other kinds of decisions that are from their interpretation, their assessment of how they've been received, how they've had membership, how they felt loved, how they felt cared, Did they see genuineness there, respect there? Were they able to grow, right? These are all things that young people are assessing at all stages of their life, and they make choices how they spend their time and how they participate in groups. All right. So beautiful families. Let me pause right there. I appreciate Mulatto up in here. If anyone else is sort of listening in and you're willing to sort of let me know who you are, I'd love to know who we're chopping with. And if you're a parent, if you have any questions related to the intergenerational space, Big Granddad's in the house. Appreciate you, Big Pop. I'm in here chopping with the beautiful people about what is my topic today? Identity expression through names, mantras, and hair. And so we just sort of did a recap about things that parents have influenced. Just a few of them. I talked about 4: character development of your beautiful babies, what you sort of provide for them from a social class kind of dynamic, always wanting to progress. I'm in a different social circumstance than my father was because he was intentional about ensuring opportunities for myself, largely through formal education. My proverbial circumstances have changed because my parents thought about me as an adult when I was a child, right? And they also thought about what my educational pathway would be. That was a non-negotiable, a lot of emphasis on getting good grades and learning information, but also cultural, particularly biracial children who live a reality that is not the mom and the dad's. Mom is monolithic, perhaps dad is monoculture, but you produced a child that will now be experiencing both worlds. How you manage that beautiful family will determine and show up in your beautiful child down the road in terms of how they feel about themselves. All right. What we got? The Owl Show. I'm biracial, but never considered or was aware of identity through hair. Okay. Well, I'll bring that up here in a moment there, Al, the Al Show, and then feel free to co-sign or critique. All right. So as you think about your child, and hopefully you thought about through intentionality, y'all made a baby out of preparation and not passion, right? And part of your thinking is, not only the school and, discipline, those kind of things, but also put some thought on how you want them to grow and become culturally. Because racially, they're biracial. Racially, they're biracial. But culturally, what will they become? This is a conversation that needs to be had with mom and dad, right? This is a conversation that needs to be had with loved ones and extended ones. It's a conversation that you ought to have with people who are biracial themselves, multi-generational biracial, someone that's in perhaps my generation. I'm 54 years old. Someone that might be 33 years old, like Mulatto, or someone that might be 20. Have conversations with folks who have experienced this in different kind of ways, and then think intentionally about culturally, how do you want to begin your biracial child's journey? Okay. My journey was Black. My immersion into culture was Black. It was at 16 years old that my parents divorced, and I was no longer in the two-parent home representing different cultures. I was also sort of had a lot of love from both sides of the family, had a chance to travel and spend some time with my French European mother. Certainly had a chance to spend some time in New Orleans with my Creole African American father. And so I had love that was poured in from both areas. But at 16, I decided I was going to get out of the proverbial gray of biracialness and land in a Blackness through intentionality that I largely set in motion through college. And in college, from day one, went to Black summer programs, joined Black organizations, joined a Black fraternity, made choices around my romantic interests, things that I volunteered in, organizations that I was a part of, what books I read, what classes I took. And out of this journey, I landed in a Black cultural centeredness, and it has been wonderful and joyful for me to this day. That was my pathway. There's other pathways where you could just think, hey, they're just going to be biracial, only biracial, right? Which is an emerging group, right? In fact, some of the comments you see here are perhaps representing that voice, to where a person acknowledges both, right? They acknowledge both who they are, and they seek an understanding of both the love source's heritage, right? They recognize the duality of their family and of their existence, and they're choosing not to lean one way or the other, and they got sort of a psychological, mental foot in both, or they have a psychological mental foot in one, and that is the emerging identity of biracialness, just as an entity and space as itself, or there might be something else where you choose not to even think about it and you let the chips fall where they may. All right. So that I set the stage. Let me get a sip of water. How's everybody feeling? Hope you're doing all right. I will put the StreamYard link in here after I kind of introduce my concept, and then I will open it up for any questions if there aren't any, and then we'll wrap it up. Okay. Intentionally and positioning your child to navigate social peer circles and culture. Parents, you have to do this. You have to be intentional in positioning your child to navigate social peer circles and culture. So whatever it is you want, which is your right, your decision, whatever it is you want and you see best for your family, here's a couple of things to think about. What city do you live in? What city do you live in? These are choices that we can make as parents, right? And if you want them to have ample opportunity for Black interface, or ample opportunity for a diverse interface, or ample opportunity for international interface, whatever it is, that's reflected in where you choose to reside, right? What is the options that are within driving distance for your beautiful seeds? That's something to think about, right? And then within the city, where do you live in that city, right? My wife and I wanted our children to have a presence or a connection to a Blackness, and so we chose to move to the side of town that had perhaps the highest concentrations of African American here in the state and city where I live. And for us, that provided visual, unspoken, subconscious engagement, involvement in just a Black tapestry. It also has strong Latino community in there, and then increasingly through a gentrification kind of nuance, you're even finding white families. The city planners for this particular area did an outstanding job to where you have multi different kind of income homes, and so we were able to live in a community that represented a Blackness from socioeconomic range, from educational range, from employment range, and this became their normal ebb and flow in just their day-to-day kind of existence. So what city are you in? What state, what city, and then where do you live, right? Are you intentional in providing visual opportunities for your beautiful seeds? And then finally, not finally, but what is the racial composition of the school, right? In the state where I live, you do not have to go to your home district school. You can pick a school that is of your own selection. And so we surveyed the environment. Academic was our top priority. We wanted to go to an excelling academic environment, but also mindful of the diversity of the environment. The schools we chose were not predominantly Black kinds of schools, but they were more diverse reflection of the broader humanity. We then complemented or supplemented their exposure to Black spaces through co-curricular kinds of activities, through intentionality, through sports, through clubs, through Boy Scouts, Girl Scouts, through associations, through social networks, have you folks and people come by your house, all those kinds of things. But it was intentional. Big Al, let me see the Al show. The choosing of one culture or one aspect just wasn't feasible for me, at least. I don't find it realistic as a biracial person. Yeah. I'd love for you to come up, learn about what your racial configuration is, maybe your age set. But the choosing of one culture or one aspect just wasn't feasible for me, at least. I don't find it realistic as a biracial person, right? Yeah, I'd love to chop that up more with you. I'm saying parents, you have to at least address the question of cultural beginning. Let the grown man and woman determine on cultural ending, but you have to have a beginning, right? Rather than avoid the question, let your baby vacillate and sort of float in the wind, just trying to figure this thing out, because it was complicated in my day, and this was absent social media, right? I didn't have any kind of input or feedback or randomness from YouTube or social media, right? If a person had an issue with me, they had to at least look me in my face and talk to me, right? And so it's a different kind of time. And parents, particularly in your era, in which your babies are growing up in a very fast moving kind of environment with a lot of opportunities for validation, but also for critique or for malicious kind of critiques, from people that don't even know you, just sort of lumping and categorizing you and putting things upon you that you didn't ask for and are nor deserving of, right? So the racial composition of the school, co-curricular activities, and then the last two before I get into the new three is dinner table talk, right? Dinner table talk. What are you talking to your babies about at dinner? The dinner table is the classroom of the home. The other classroom of the home is the car when you're traveling, right? So try not to always listen to the music unless you're exposing the babies to some good oldies, right? But have some conversation, some intentionality. There's plenty of current events that can spark good conversation. I'm sure if you're like my kids, you ask them how was the day, they say I'm good, right? They say I'm good, right? Well, give me a little bit more. But if we can prompt conversations, if we can share with them what we're thinking, how we dealt with something, at the dinner table is a place where you can affirm family values, but also, when appropriate, you can talk about the beauty and the complexity of the heritage of both the love sources, both mom and dad. But just expand the baby's mind, let them know that they're not alone and maybe feeling this navigation kind of dynamic, and just be there in the great classroom of the home, which is the dinner table. And then finally, cultural cachet, right? Does your baby fit in with their heritage groups, right? Do they look the part? Do they understand the language? Do they have kind of the symbols of it? Do they have the attire, whatever the nuances is of that youth group? Make sure their game is tight and that they are positioned well. To include, going to the owl show, hair. To include hair, okay? One of the ways in which it's important in identity expression through names, mantras, and hairs is to let your babies manage their own hair. As someone as light as I am, at the time in the 70s, I had an afro. In the 80s, I had a jerry curl. In middle school, I had a shag. At some point, I had a high top fade, whatever the case may be. But my hair was my outward representation that there was a blackness in me, that I had a black heritage in me, and my hair was a critical symbol of blackness at the time. And I remember, asking my dad, could I have a jerry curl, right? And I wanted that because I'm sorry to be admitting this, y'all, but I had a jerry curl. I wanted a jerry curl because that's what my peer groups were wearing. That was the style at the time, right? And I wanted to fit in. I wanted to be aesthetically on par, and I wanted to be handsome and attractive for the women. And the way in which I navigated that within a black identity that I was experiencing and eventually was fully immersed in was through my hair, right? In a previous session, I talked about the importance of the barbershop for biracial kids. Man, it always just pains me when I see, a young biracial kid clearly awkward at black spaces. They got the box cut, just something, the fashion game is a little off, and they just feel on the margins. They feel awkward because they don't have the cultural symbols, at least in this case, from my examination, of understanding sort of the collective cues and nuances and aesthetics of youthful black appearance. And so the hair game is critical, critical, critical. Let them express themselves. My daughter probably changes her hairstyle between braids, mixed girl curly, um, uh, ponytail, whatever the case may be, but that's the way she's asserting in the world. She's saying something about my appearance, how she looks, how she's accepted, how she's received is very, very important. Like all people at that age, she's conscious about her appearance, and she's conscious about how she's presenting black. And hair is one of the ways in which she does it. My one of my sons used to have dreads. Great classroom of the home. Nice phrase, right? Thank you, the Owl Show. One of my sons, he was a kind of quiet kid. He was more tracked in the arts. But I talked to him. I said, "Hey, man, and this is me living vicariously. I lost my hair in early 20s, and could I grow hair right now, I'd be dreaded out, man. I would be this Rastafari man. I'd be dreaded out." And I asked him, I said, "Do you want dreads?" And he said, "Yeah." And so I took him to the dread woman, and she curled him up, and he had dreads probably 8 years, man. They were down to his back. But that was his way of kind of expressing himself. And then another one of my sons, man, he does the braids, he does the parts, the fade type, but their hair is a point of sort of self-care and obsession. But that is the way in which biracial kids sort of test waters, test things out, express themselves, regardless if they lean towards a blackness or a biracialness, they're gonna want the fly cut, right? And the hair being presentable, being current, being with the latest phases and fads, that's critically important to young people coming of age. All right. We need biracial children to be proud of their heritage without trying to fit into one group with their hair. All right. Hopefully, I kind of addressed that on the back end. Even if the biracial kid does not lean towards black, he don't want a fresh haircut there, mulatto. All right. The next part. What do you call them? What is their name? One of the most important decisions that you can make is what you name your child. What do you name your child? Your child will be forever the carrier of that name. And I hope that you and your wife, you and your husband spend a lot of time tossing out names, looking at name books, looking at family customs, if there's family customs around names. But the name that you give your child essentially is their calling card. It's their outward facing sense of beginning with the broader society. When you say your child's name, what are you saying to them? Does the name have a meaning? Do they understand that meaning? So every time you say it, they subconsciously are affirmed in whatever the meaning of their name is. When they go out into public society for the first time and are looking left and right in nervous and anticipated kind of ways, and then they say their name, right? They know what it means, but they hear other people say their name, and they hear peer groups begin to say their name. Does it provide them a sense of neutrality? Does it provide them a sense of indifference, or does it give them a little jolt? Does it give them a little jolt about something positive? The name you give your child is critically important because it sends little endorphin messages to them every time they hear it or read it. And does it affirm them or is it indifferent? Beautiful families, name your child something that lifts them up, that tells them how beautiful and powerful they are, and they're reminded of it every time the syllables come out of their or someone else's name. All right. NBA Young Gucci, J4, nice to see you in the biracial part of YouTube. Appreciate that, brother. I saw some comments before. Respect to the chat, OSU. What is OSU? NBA Gucci, Mulatto Vanguard, nice name, bro. I'm mulatto too. Okay. All right, beautiful. We got the mulattoes up in here. Back in my day, I don't even know if mulatto was a good term or a negative term or an indifferent term. Anyway, names. So what I did, what my family and I did, what my wife and I did, we gave them names that are, that have meaning. They also are reflective of where we were psychologically when the child was born. And two of them have very popular Arabic names. Two of them have very unique, creative names. And then my oldest one, through my first wife, she has, just sort of a classic African-American name. But what we did was we put a fourth name. We gave them a fourth name, a cultural name. And so they got their first name, their middle name, and their last name, as in, most people, not all, but we gave them a fourth name. And so they got their middle name, their first name, the middle name in traditional kinds of sense. The third name is a cultural name, and the fourth name is the family name, all right? I chose the name Toure, Toure, because it represents Stokely Carmichael, Kwame Ture, aka Kwame Ture, and it represents Sekou Toure, which is a liberating figure on the continent of Africa. And so these two names, every time they read their name or someone says their name out loud, symbolically, they're connected to a civil rights leader. They're connected to a young person that was a soldier of Dr. King, that had his own kind of worldview. He was the one that didn't coin the phrase, but he made popular Black Power. He was a person that had some frustrations with the United States of America and chose to become an expatriate in Africa. He was someone that actually fought in African liberation wars, if you can believe it. And so if once they learn about the name Teray, they're automatically connected to it. And because by design, I wanted my children to have a Black leaning, a Black sense of self, a Black connection to a Black diasporic, to be a part of the continued work of the ancestors and the elders, to be relevant and to be thoughtful and have a healthy love for Blackness in the current moment, I put it in their name. So every time they read it and hear it, they're reminded of their father's heritage, of their grandfather's heritage, of their grandmother's heritage. But also in a flip nuance, Touré is actually a French version of T-O-R-E, which is also a common spelling of Touré. And so I chose the French version. So when they read the French version of Touré, they also then are connecting to their father's mother, their mother's father and mother. They're connected in both kinds of ways through the cultural name. And they said that and heard it from day one. Let me pause there, see what we got. My mom named me Adam. I'm proud of her for that, right? And is it Adam and Eve, Adam? Because that would be the first man, right? People know what Adam is, all right? I don't know about the term. I just use it for identity purpose of what kind of biracial. I don't know about the term. I just use it for identity purposes of what kind of. Oh, it's talking about mulatto. Okay, I appreciate that, brother. Black Center thought. Us younger folks are reclaiming our pride in being biracial and honoring both of our heritage. Yeah. You certainly should honor both love sources, right? Certainly honor both love sources. We are taking the word mulatto and reclaiming it. It is something good to identify us. All right, I feel you. The reason the Black community is upset because this wasn't in their plans for us to be aware of our racial makeup. Okay. For those of y'all sort of reading the comments, these, I'm assuming, I don't want to label, but there's this new initiative, it might not be new, but a major movement of young people gathering and sort of reclaiming space. And they're sort of not struggling, but they're having issues with how they've been perceived, received, and treated within the Black space, right? This part about having to have Black cultural membership by the gatekeeping of Blackness, right? And there's a vulnerability to that, and there's not a feeling of high agency where one can self-determine. And they're at the moment, they're sort of forming and airing things out and talking things out, and they're trying to formulate space. And I'm not quite sure where to go from there, but it is endemic, beautiful family, of a swelling kind of discontent within the biracial space, one that I was not aware of from my own lens. And so out of respect for it, I've been having some conversations and doing some content in the biracial space, and it's had some energy on my page, all full transparency. I'm going to sort of pursue things that are having some energy. I was just talking about dads, and wasn't too many folks interested, but I want to be respectful of the biracial space while honoring the purpose of the page, which is to help parents, particularly fathers, produce healthy, grounded, solid children with a particular focus on sons. All right. It didn't go how it planned when they made us. It didn't go how they planned when they made us. All right. Monoracial Black people want to keep biracial as their mules. Instead of seeking acceptance, we have decided to just accept ourselves. Beautiful. Brothers, I did not have that quandary. I was received with love. I was received by upperclassmen, men a few years older than me, so that with a confidence in Blackness. And they invited me, they challenged me, they encouraged me, they taught me about sort of what Blackness was at the time. This was 1980, early 80s, at the time of the X-Hat and movie and music. And the question was, what are you doing to be relevant to Black uplift and progress? And so Blackness was just not aesthetic. It was just not social. It was just not what you listen to, how you party. It was about how do you live your life in a contemporary time to try to improve the conditions of a community that has tremendous beauty and complexity, and at the same time has issues, challenges that need solution and resolution. And so blackness also had a call to it, an action to it. And so that resonated with me tremendously. And it has been a means by which I found footing in the space. Exactly. We don't accept this from the monolith. We accept ourselves and are reclaiming our uniqueness. All right, that's clear. That's a good focus. That's a beautiful thing, to accept yourself and not some identity objective, a one side of a two-sided coin made for us. All right. All right. My last point, and then I'm going to throw in, I'm going to put in the comment section the link. Should anyone want to come up and chop it up? And then I'm going to give you my last piece, which is around mantras. Today, monoracial black people will offend if you say that you're black. Today, monoracial black people will be offended if you say that you're black. That's a dang shame. That is a shame. That is a shame. And I would dare say, mulatto, that's not all of them. My life's work is spent with young spaces, high school and college age. And there's a lot of African-American men, young men coming of age. And they do not all share your sentiment. They do not all share your sentiment, which does not negate the fact that your sentiment is real based upon your life lived. But not all of them. All right. Mulatto, I think you have a point there. The biracial social media groups don't tolerate ODR or any monocultural dominance. All right, there's a vocabulary here I need to learn. Finally, the last piece is, who do you tell them they are? Beautiful family, who do you tell your babies that they are? If you look at mantras or creeds or prayers, things that are said regularly, things that are said daily, things that are said often, things that are said repeatedly, in this process, you are sending a message, you're echoing it, you're underscoring it, you're reaffirming it, you're doubling down on it, right? Is there something in your day-to-day ritual that you say, that your children say, that they know, that they recite, that affirms who they are? And who they are initially will come from who you tell them they are, beautiful mom and dad, right? At some point, they will evaluate as they get mature and grown, and they'll make their own choices. But parents, you cannot deny the fact that you are both the teacher, the provider, the nurturer, and the lover. Who do you tell them that they are? If you look at most families that do have some sort of recitation, it's largely in the prayer format that's consistent with their religion identity, right? With the group that the religious institution that they're a member of. That typically becomes what they recite. And in that, they're reciting the values of that particular denomination. I would invite you, if that's what you're doing, wonderful. But I would invite you to create your own mantra, to create your own creed, to create your own prayer, right? Just to make it up. So that when you sit down for dinner, or when you have family gatherings, or when there's a special occasion and people are gathered and you say, okay, it's family prayer time. What do you say? How do you manifest in linguistic kinds of ways the values of your family, right? And so in my family, at a very young age, we created a family prayer, something that the babies would take turns reciting, something that they would sort of stumble through and try to memorize and work through it, and big brother would laugh at them if they messed it up, right? The exercise wasn't necessarily to get it exact, but was to confess it, to profess family values, to say it out loud, to put it out in the air, and to then let it fall back on top of who you are, so it constantly affirms who you are as a family and what the family values and what your identities are. So in my family prayer, it goes, in the name of the Creator and all of its masculine, feminine, and earthly representations, we ask that you look favorably over this family and the larger community called humanity, for we realize that we are all interconnected. So in this prayer, in the name of the Creator, acknowledging something omnipotent, acknowledging something beyond the collective of us, to acknowledge the grand cosmic Creator, right? But then to break it down in all of its masculine, feminine and earthly representations to articulate the legitimacy of all living, breathing things. We ask that you look favorably over this family. That's a selfish gesture, right? Can you look over favorably over us? And the larger community called humanity. For we realize that we are all interconnected. My children repeated that daily, and now they repeat it during high family kind of circumstances. And in doing so, they are affirming family values created, managed, monitored, nurtured, applauded from their parents. So, beautiful family, that's what I wanted to share with you. Your child is biracial, which is different than the two monolithic parents. They can be black if you so decide you want to move in that way. That's what I did with myself. That's what I did with my children. They can be biracial. They can be biracial with a healthy respect and understanding of both their particular love sources, heritages, or they can be something else. Clearly, that's in your world to decide. But I'm encouraging high intentionality. We talked about a number of things that I've echoed and underscored in the past. Today, I wanted to introduce: let them babies be creative with their hair. Let those babies have names that represent family values, and think about creating something that the family resuscitates often as a way of underscoring and affirming who they are and who the family sets in motion. All right, beautiful family. Okay, we're biracial, we're both, and the world, we need to accept that. We're not going to try and fit in. We'll create our own space for us today. It's a new day. Okay. The owl show, that is good. Choosing one side isn't being yourself. You are not at all your full potential. A biracial person is at their full potential identity wise when they see themselves as their own race made from the two. So, yeah, it's a lot of action. I'll show NBA. I've been so many biracial people try to play the monoracial card. It doesn't work. I've been so many biracial people try to. Okay. All right. I'm going to bring some folks up. Mulatto, how you doing, brother?
Hey, I'm doing good, brother. You could call me Vanguard if you want as well. I had the name change. Yeah, just what I put in the chat actually was far as
Vanguard, I mean, hybrid, you're a little low. Say something again.
is my
Say
volume
something
good? Can
again.
you hear me?
Yeah, I got you
Is
now.
my volume's good?
Yep, I got you.
Okay, sorry about that. Yeah, so what I want to say essentially in the chat when I put like black thought, because a lot of the younger folks, as you can see, it's a generational thing, right? It was easier for you to kind of get granted access in the blackness than it is today. It's very different today. I'm 33. And so a lot of younger folks, like myself, I can still consider myself young. We kind of accept our uniqueness and our exceptionality. So we want to, essentially reclaim our identity. And like the gentleman in the chat put, we wouldn't be, at our full potential if we just went towards one monolith. So a lot of people you're going to find, especially in the golden sphere and people like myself, we reject the idea that we have to fit into one monolith. We want to create our own space. We have our own identity, and we want to embrace that. But I understand your position and your generation, and also kind of the route you took, as far as your monoracial black partner and your children who, like you said, are culturally black, but they kind of present biracial. And you gave
Right.
us some examples about their hair and how you said, like, for biracial, for parents of biracial children, how they can kind of, the name is very important. Like I told you, my name's Adam, so I really appreciate my white mother for giving me that name. I'm really proud of my name. And as far as the hair component, so you did mention as far as like essentially for these biracial children to kind of fit into the black monolith with their hair. So that was one point I kind of disagreed with, because like I was mentioning to you, I feel like this newer generation, they are rejecting fitting into the monolith. So they need to establish, or I guess you can say maintain their uniqueness, being biracial. So I don't really, accept, I mean, for me personally, right, that parents should just have them kind of fit into the black monolith by having their haircut, done a certain way. So I just wanted to bring that up, but thank you.
No, I appreciate and respect that perspective for parents listening in, interracial generation. Mulatto's offering something to consider, right? Something to think about. Certainly take in all sources of information as you make a decision how you're going to orient your biracial child culturally. And culturally is a part of how they engage social constructs and organizations, and then eventually they figure out through the rhythm of that kind of the norms and the protocols of group interaction, and to some extent that has cultural leanings to it. Mulatto is disagreeing with my thoughts around the hair component. Um, but no matter what they do, if it's not culture, young people want to make connections. They want to feel good. They want to feel accepted. And a part of that is that they have the same things as much as possible as their peer group. So respect for that. Hybrid, what do you think about the name piece and the mantra to the essence of the presentation?
Oh yeah, well, like I mentioned, the name piece is very accurate. I agree with that as well. The name is extremely important, and as you mentioned, is essentially how hearing your name can kind of spark a level of did you say dopamine? I forgot what chemical you referenced,
I
but
think
you
that's
it said
important. Yeah.
endorphin. There you go. Yeah, yeah, and I agree with that as well. I really think the name component is very important in what they name their child, and that's another thing that I wanted to mention with obviously your situation with kind of going towards the monolith with your children. So you referenced two different names that connected them to the black struggle per se. So they have an
Right.
African name and an African American name. So that's kind of the thing. Like I mentioned, me being biracial, if I were to pursue a partner, a biracial woman, and have children, which we would classify as MGM, right, multi generational mix, I would choose them a name and identity that kind of encapsulates, their heritage from both sides. So white and black. I would be proud to do that.
Boom. That's and this is what I was sort of throwing out there as a consideration, right? How do you use names to give a sense of esteem to to the son that you're having, and then how do you simultaneously represent the duality of their heritage and existence, if it's possible. Beautiful. I appreciate your feedback there, Hybrid. All right.
Thank you, sir.
NBA Young Gucci, you can be white like Eminem and heavy in black culture, being biracial and culturally black, it's okay if that's what the parents want. All right. NBA Gucci. NBA Gucci, you can biracial into whatever culture you please. You can be biracial and build a biracial culture if you want. All right. The Owl Show, how are you, sir? I'm going to unmute you.
I'm fine. And how are you?
I lost you, the Owl Show. I think maybe okay, go ahead.
You muted me. Yeah, I think you muted me. Well, hello. How are you?
I'm doing very well, brother. Appreciate your comments, your feedback. How's it going today?
Oh, it's fine. Yeah, I came across your live and noticed the topic. So before I kind of note the things I intended to note, I just had a couple of questions. I take it you are biracial. Am I right about that?
Yes, my mother is a European woman from France, and my father's a Creole black man from New Orleans.
Okay. And you mentioned your family, the family that you have.
Mm-hmm.
I take it thus that your family would be more multiracial per se.
Well, they got a biracial dad and a black mama. Does that make them?
Okay, right. That would make sense. Right. And I guess you said you had grown up, I guess in the 70s and 80s. Is that about right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. All right. Just curious. And so here's what from what I see in the chat from people like Vanguard, I'll just use that term. I
So
don't want to.
let me interject right quick. Do you have any thoughts or reflections on the content I shared before we do the chat stuff?
Oh, I think the way some of the things you talk about are interesting, right? I don't know what your background. Are you like a teacher, or I assume you're a teacher, maybe?
No, more so life skills.
Okay.
Yeah, more life skills,
Okay.
tough stuff. Yeah.
Okay. So some of what you said was interesting in terms of what I have found to be necessary components in regards to biracial mixed race offspring. Um, I think a mistake that some people make is they think they can just raise their mixed race, sons or daughters just like anyone else, and
Mhm.
or monoracial, uh, you know, um, offspring. And the
Right.
problem is that isn't the case because you have considerations, right? You have to consider the nature of race in American society and racial
Mhm.
aspects in American society. And you also
Right.
have to understand how the mixed race son or daughter will have to navigate race and ethnicity and those aspects within the difficulties of American society to an extent. So there are
Mhm.
practical considerations and there are larger considerations, right?
Right.
So what I have found that is important, the basic characteristic that I have found as a biracial person, who has been on biracial social media groups and talked to a number of biracial people, is I've come to the conclusion, and when I'm hearing a lot of experiences, a lot of anecdotes, a lot of stories, that the two major components, family and community, the most important really seems to be community, because while family has an importance, it's important for anyone. You don't have to be
Right.
biracial in order for family to be important. But community ends up being more important because it shapes how biracial people see themselves and how they are seen by others. And so thus where they grow up seems to have a huge impact on the development and maturation of mixed race people and biracial people. So I think that's important. Now,
Yeah.
the part about hair didn't interest me,
Thou shall,
to
thou
be
shall,
honest.
thou shall,
Yeah.
thou shall. Yeah, the intentionality part that we talked about, that parents have to have. You're absolutely right. That's not exclusive to biracial, but I really like your point underscoring the fact that a biracial child is not just a child of a certain age set with normal developmental realities. They have a very unique dynamic to where neither one of the parents have a life lived that's going to be the same as their biracial child because they're navigating two different cultures. So excellent point there. Sorry to cut you off.
No,
I just want, yeah. Hmm.
okay, that's fine. Uh, so that was interesting. I did like the phrase, sort of the table as a classroom. That's a nice little phrase. I kind of like that. Now, I don't know. I can't really speak to hair. Hair is never important to me personally, as a black, white, biracial person, or white, black, biracial, however you want to see it. So I don't have much to say or anything to say about that. But I did want to sort of kind of provide an understanding for some of the, I think, why. Here's what I see in terms of that's what the reason I asked a couple questions ahead of time. It's not unusual for people who are black, white, biracial to have moved into a monocultural, made a monocultural choice, and that is to be a part of an African American culture or black culture, as you might put it.
That was my journey.
This is based on what I've seen, um, and what I have heard from others. You know, partially this might be because such biracial people were raised in these communities, so that's what they know. They don't really know anything beyond that, or not much beyond that. The other aspect is, and it may go to what you noted, your personal aspect, choice. Some people choose, basically, as biracial people, to essentially be monoracial. They
Yeah.
essentially make a cultural and racial choice. Frankly, these are people that I call, my personal terminology for them is what I call wannabes, right? I call them people who want to be black.
Now,
And so,
now,
or really want to be monoracial.
Actually, let me jump in. Now, that was
Okay.
my pathway. Would I be in that same category as a wannabe?
Um, Probably because you made that choice. I probably do need another term. I probably do need another term because, there are biracial people who kind of made the choice, but they're kind of comfortable with their choice and they don't make an issue or problem for anyone else. So I need another term for that. But that's monoracial is, I mean,
Yeah,
wannabe is the term I came up with a long time ago because
right.
I dealt with, and then there's another term, the more difficult ones, people that are more politically oriented and socially oriented in regards to community. And this is what I would call militants. Again, this is my terminology for it. And these are people that are so radically monoracial that as a biracial person, there's there's going to be conflict, at least for me and maybe some others. Again, these are my terms. These are my terms. They don't
Yeah. So
come
let me jump in
from
right quick. I'm gonna let me jump in right quick.
scholarly tone.
The Al show. Hold on one sec.
Yeah, go ahead.
The whatever language is important, right? Names are important, as I've talked about, but we also have to be careful with language and with what we call people, right? Do we are we able to think of, are we able to use vocabulary to clearly identify someone without it sort of being a belittling, right? Now, vocabulary and titles and names are consistent in all languages across all times, spaces. But as we continue down an identity kind of journey, how can we still preserve a person's integrity while at the same time expressing our ideals and thoughts? So, whatever vocabulary that you shape or names that you come up with, how do we maintain dignity in the person we're interacting with, um, but at the same time, accurately convey our voice, right? So you didn't say this per se, and I recognize that you are, seeking a different kind of vocabulary, but we've been kicking it about an hour, right? We've been kicking it about an hour. I shared a little bit with you, but then you had to kind of own up to the word wannabe, right? We don't know people's journey. We don't know their specificity in their language. So as much as we can preserve dignity when we talk to them or describe them or sort of label them, to me that certainly produces more harmony on the back end. Just my thoughts there. The floor is yours again,
Right.
Al.
I appreciate your thoughts. So let me move on from there. So
Okay.
here's, I want to speak to what some people in the chat have talked to. I have
Sure.
to be brutally honest. As somebody who is mixed race, who is biracial, I never gave much thought to being biracial most of my life. It wasn't a big deal for me. I wasn't overly conscious of it, and I didn't have to be overly conscious of it because I didn't have people bothering me about it. People trying to define me, and because I hear this all the time from other biracial people where they say, people will be like, what are you? Who are you? Where are you from? What planet are you from? Or whatever. And I never had to go
What
through.
generation were you born in? What year were you born? Just so I have
I
context.
was born in the 70s, so I was raised in the 70s and 80s.
Okay. And did you identify as biracial, or you just didn't think about it? Or
I didn't
monoracial?
think about it. Basically, back then, it was mixed. Didn't have the word biracial, as you are probably well aware,
Right.
which I didn't like. I didn't like the word mixed because it made me sound like a drink. And
You're a
um,
cocktail.
yeah, I'm not a 7 and 7. I mean, I'm not that. Not a rum
Right.
and coke. I'm not that. So, but so I like biracial a lot better. I'm perfectly happy with that. But as I was saying, what I think I didn't give much thought to it. And so when I was in my 40s, I wound up on social media groups after seeing a trailer on YouTube for a documentary called I'm Biracial, Not Black, Damn It, or something like that. And I ended up seeing a couple more videos from biracial people. And I realized something. Even though I'd grown up in a place with a number of mixed race people, I really didn't know anything about biracial people. I was biracial, and I didn't know much about biracial people. And I was kind of in an odd situation. Again, I was in a place where there's mixed race people. See, but I didn't see them as mixed race. I didn't see them as, oh, biracial and all this. And so I started going on biracial media groups, Facebook, whatever. And that's when I started, and I covered this in a video, a live stream video on my channel called The Education of a Biracial Person. Okay. And I call it that because that was what it was. As a biracial person, I had to be educated in learning about other biracial people. And I think this is something that some mixed race people do go through. And so part of that was learning, for me, learning history, the history of mixed race people, primarily black, white, biracial people in America. Okay. Right? For example, the fact that the term, and I don't like this term, but I'll use it here, mulatto, was on the census form. That mixed race people, essentially, those people were classified in the U.S. Census prior to 1920 or so. And that mixed race people in places like, specifically places like Charleston, South Carolina, and New Orleans, Louisiana, had communities and institutions and organizations and groups and societies. That mixed race people have a history, primarily black, white, but I'm sure others. I don't know about other blends, so to speak, other types. I'm very interested in learning more, but that is black, white, or white, black, biracials. There is a history in this country. There is that we as mixed race people, we had a status, we had a case, but when Plessy versus Ferguson came along, and when the imposition of separate but equal came along, it helped destroy by the status and the space for biracial people, tenuous though it may have been, very limited though it may have been in this country. It destroyed it. And so what happened is that mixed race people were black, white, biracial people ended up largely being amalgamated into African-American communities, which is where you probably get such aspects as the Blue Vein Society and HBCUs, for example. I call HBCUs actually historically biracial colleges and universities.
Jump in, brother. Let me jump in.
Go ahead.
Let me ask, are you suggesting that the individual communities of mixed or mulatto or biracial people was then sort of hijacked after the fact by the one-drop rule, Plessy versus Ferguson, versus starting black and then creating its own societies and then maybe being sort of negotiated by law and legislation?
Well, there was no negotiated by law and legislation. I mean, when segregation came, it changed everything. When the one-drop rule went into effect, it changed everything. Let's look at a legal example, a current one, the overturning of Roe v. Wade.
Right.
It was a change that occurred when, in the case of Roe, you have a law that was not federally recognized, so also on state levels, obviously. And now it's been overturned, right? The effects will be different depending on where you live, but it was overturned. Just as there was a change in that law, there was a change for mixed race people. When the one-drop rule went into effect, it delegitimized them. It delegitimized mixed race people in this country. It delegitimized biracial people in this country. It delegitimized multiracial
yeah,
people.
let me jump in. So, and I've heard this
Yeah, go
before.
ahead.
I'm very curious about it. I'm very curious about it. So, the one drop rule, essentially, any bit of blackness and you're black, right? Despite heritage configuration, right? So that would
Essentially,
then,
yeah.
yeah, that would then make the case that a biracial existence independent to blackness existed prior to that, correct? And
Prior
I'm
to that, well,
assuming
yeah, of course.
and I'm
There
assuming that
were, like I said, yeah. Go ahead.
and I'm assuming that's the mulatto designation from the 1790 census, correct?
Yeah, that's part of it. Yeah, that would
Let,
be
let me just
fairly
finish this
accurate.
off. Let me finish this off. The 1790 census was the mulatto designation was came at the request of a scientist to their legislator because they wanted to study if there's a difference between mono black, mixed black white, and whiteness across a number of scientific variables. The designation was for nefarious reasons, but when the biracial child in 1790 all of a sudden had a name for themselves up until 1865 and beyond, did they consider themselves separate identity within a chattel enslavement economy? So help me understand that, because in my worldview, they were black despite legislative labeling. And so when a person says we exist, and I understand that, particularly in Creole kind of spaces.
Well, yeah, I can understand why you would see it that way because, again, this isn't well known, right? Again, when you look at something like, what is the book? The Accident of Color by Daniel Brooks, where he talks
Mhm.
about Charleston, South Carolina, and New Orleans, Louisiana, and mixed race communities there. He deals with some of this history, or deals with this history to a certain extent.
Okay.
But you had, prior to the Civil War, was in parts of the United States, mixed race people who were separate and apart from Black people in the sense that they had communities, they had organizations, they had societies, and they were also considered separate in the laws in various states. So how the laws recognized, how the racial classifications recognized what whiteness was important. And that is
Mhm.
what I think helped change. When we talk about the one drop rule, it was basically the fluidity and slight fluidity in regards to, let's just use the term whiteness, that was a part of this, right? So, yeah, there were, I mean, since you have a separate classification on the census that existed up until 1920, you also
Mhm.
had, again, organizations and societies like the Brown Society, right?
Mhm.
You had a people who were, for the most part, differentiated. And what happened was, I think Brooks brings this out in his book. After the Civil War, what happened was that mixed race people, biracials, multiracials, instead of just fighting for their rights and doing what any group does, which is self-interest and all that, logical
Yeah.
self-interest,
Right.
they decided to get together with African Americans and help see if they could both fight for greater rights for both parties, for both aspects.
Mhm.
And unfortunately, that didn't work out. One, because of in the South, especially because of what was happening in the South, which is after the Civil War, you had the legislatures, at least after 1877, which is when federal troops left
Yeah.
and
Reconstruct.
Reconstruction was over. What you
Mhm.
had was the return of Southern racist legislatures
Right.
and trying to impose black codes, right? And of course, trying to do that along with that, again, you have to. I mean, that's why Plessy v. Ferguson occurred really in many respects because you had the Separate Car Act in Louisiana, which that
Right.
was technically funded. And Plessy himself was kind of a test subject for that. He
Mhm.
deliberately went in one section of the car to kind of try to make a case, but the case wound up not in his favor, right? because the SCOTUS ruled basically in favor of segregation.
Right.
Well, then basically they did. So again, how I, in my reading and in my examination and my analysis, I view the plight of the mixed race person, primarily black, white, biracial. I don't want to limit it to that, but it primarily historically is that way in this country.
Right.
Basically, we lost 100 years. So I take it from 1900 to about 2000. And of course, in 2000, what happened? You had mixed race as an option installed on the census, right? Categories of what happened. So we basically, as mixed race people in this country, lost our independence. We lost our status. We lost our autonomy. We lost our kind of our own sense of who we were as a people and as a group. All of that was lost, not just under the law, but socially as well. So we basically have lost about 100 years in this country. And now it's 2020.
You're talking right there, brother. You're dropping a lot of science. The book that you mentioned, maybe you could put that in the chat. I'd like to take a look at it. I'm in the parenting space. I'm hearing a lot of passion around biracial reclamation and identity development. I just hope as the biracial group continues to build momentum, that it just kind of does that because the numbers would warrant it. Maybe there's historical precedent that can resurrect itself, but I just hope that it's not this contentious relationship with blackness as an aggregate. That's the kind of the pause that I have with
it. Here's how I see it.
Al, let me jump in here, Al.
I'm
gonna wind it down because the history lesson is beautiful. It's beautiful. I definitely wish you much success in the biracial piece, but I want to kind of stay in the parenting kind of space here with my overall show and format. Did you have any question related to that, the Al show?
Well, I think what you had mentioned before, some of that I kind of liked. I just want to make one last point, and here's my last point. You mentioned the relationship to blackness, and I thought that was interesting. Here's just my observation, and this is my observation after years of being on mixed race groups and observing certain things. I think why there is a fraught relationship, and some people kind of mentioned that, there isn't an acceptance by a number of African Americans of biracial people. And I've heard that myself from people myself. And I think what's occurred is that there is a kind of catch-22 that occurs. And I think part of this is the fact that African Americans, because of, again, 100 years of this, at least, African Americans, in my view, monoracial African Americans, have been conditioned and socialized to see mixed race people as black. But here's the contradiction. They also understand that they're not quite black. So when I hear biracial people tell me they were told they weren't black enough, or they're not really black, or you're, really not a part of the community, or you're not a part of this, it speaks to the structure of what has occurred, which is a catch-22, which is this socialization and conditioning of black people to see mixed race people as black, which doesn't really occur in any other ethnic or racial community that I'm aware of. Most other racial and ethnic communities don't see mixed race people as absolutely the same as them.
Right.
And so it's a very different relationship. And I think part of the, as we mentioned before, as it's been told, part of the efforts to define, not only for biracial people to define themselves as biracial, but to kind of build a structure for mixed race people, I think will lead to more of a healthy bifurcation, so that there isn't a resentment in African American communities that I see now, where people complain about roles and stuff like that and all these other things. I think when biracial people are fully and totally bifurcated and seen for who they are, I think it would be better for African American communities, because you won't have this issue of, this, how this person looks, and of discrimination and of racism and a feeling of distinction, class distinction, or racialized
Yep.
class distinction,
Yep.
or skin color
Yep.
class distinction. Go ahead.
Yep. Al, I'm gonna stop you there. I'm gonna get ready to wrap,
Yeah.
but I like your
All
last
right.
point.
Thank you for having me. I
Yep.
appreciate it.
No doubt, no
Thank you
doubt.
so much.
I like your last point there, particularly about whatever the biracial community becomes, it does it without resentment. That's the part that really, concerns me, right? How does a new identity formation occur that isn't sort of a slash and crash of what has been an historical home, good, bad, or indifferent? And so I like your point about doing that in a way that is a symbolic break. It's a healthy break. It's a
Right.
coming of age, but it's not
Yeah.
done in a burn and slay kind of way that
No.
might be raw right now that I'm seeing in the community, because there's beauty and greatness in biracialness, and there's beauty and greatness in blackness, and to have these two basically come from the same mother's womb at odds with each other, that pains me a little bit. How can it be done in a way that does not wreak havoc upon the
Yeah.
cultural community which he was a member of?
That's
So
the
we're gonna
challenge. That's going to be the challenge. That's going
go
to be the
ahead. Yeah,
challenge. And hopefully it'll
yeah,
be a good one.
yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, brother. Appreciate the show. Thank you so much. Mulatto, I don't know if you're still in here. Hybrid, any last thoughts or words you want to share?
Yeah, just kind of funny. And my last thought I just wanted to share with you is interesting how obviously your channel and your broadcast is more geared specifically towards parenting and stuff, but
Right.
these conversations typically kind of steer towards more biracial identity and whatnot. But I think you're a very you're a very important voice in a lot of what I would say kind of the biracial plight, because you articulate things very well and your points are, extremely valid. And I do appreciate that. So that's kind of why I believe you attract a lot of us over here to your space. Even though I don't know if that gentleman had any children. I personally don't have any children. I want to, but I'm definitely strong on a biracial advocacy and identity. So that's kind
Mm-hmm.
of why I think that those conversations steer over towards here. But obviously, as you gave your presentation earlier, you chose the route towards the monolith, right? So
Right.
you geared your children to getting that kind of acceptance in the blackness per se, with the hair and the kind of the cultural identity is the names and stuff like that. But I'm here to listen and also contribute if I can. So thank you so much.
No, Hybrid, you've done that, brother, from the jump. Couple of things. Hybrid and I are discussing a collaboration on his page around, you know, when I discovered this community, I literally was taken aback. I just didn't know. And so I began to explore, in my mind, and that's all it is, my musings, what would it take for the biracial distinctive identity question to even make sense, at least in my mind. And I came up with some criteria of sorts. So we're going to process that out. His page is Mulatto Vanguard if you want to check it out. But hybrid, what do you think? I mean, I don't know if I want to be fully immersed in a biracial space. There's an intergenerational nuance. Plus, I am what I am, and by design, and how you raise your children sort of it stands with by how you believe. But I don't want to get in a tick for tat. But if you think there's some value, I might consider doing a show that's just kind of about where the energy wants to go. The energy wants to kind of talk about biracial distinction, and I'm trying to keep it on parent dynamic. But I don't know. Do you think it would warrant maybe exploring just kind of a forum of sorts that we're in here, assuming it could stay civil?
Exactly, assuming it would stay civil, and definitely you're the moderator, you control the show. I would definitely encourage you to do so, to pursue more of this kind of biracial identity and strategy, because you have a strong voice, you're very articulate in your points, and we definitely need that. More young folks, we're trying to find answers. I'm an academic. I mean, I graduated, from SDSU in San Diego, so I have a bachelor's degree, so I'm college educated, right? And you're going to have more of us here in the space. And like you mentioned, part of your criteria was having academics, talk about this
Mhm.
type of stuff. So it's very fitting for us. So I encourage you. Obviously, you have a parent. program here with your broadcast, but I encourage you to look into what, people, like you said, the intergenerational nuance. I encourage you to kind of look into what younger people are saying and how we are asserting ourselves as biracial people in this society. So
Yeah,
yeah.
that you are. That you are. And the one thing, one of the worst things an older generation can do is tune out, disregard, not see value, and not listen to what the younger generation is communicating and talking about. That's the worst thing we could possibly do. And so individuals like yourself, and even even some folks in the chat in their own way and style, they're expressing themselves as they should, because it is inevitable. MB Young Gucci kind of closes it out pretty good here. Nobody has to be fully invested in our space. Small talk is fine. It's not going anywhere. It's actually the fastest growing space as of date. As we talked about at the opening, 1% of biracial kids when I was born. Today is 17% for 10 million of the population. That is not a glitch. That is not a blip. That is something that is needs to be contended with kind of going forward. And as more and more parents are choosing to date interracially, they're going to produce more and more babies. So some sense of conversation, and ultimately, if you can see in my presentation, I'm trying to give strategy. Some strategy can be helpful as well, because the health of the society is tied to this up and coming population. Fair enough, hybrid.
Thank you, brother. I really appreciate it. Enjoy your evening.
All right, you too. We'll talk. All right, beautiful family. I kind of roll with you. I put some hours on you. Sorry to do that, but I understand the Al show. He's obviously studied. He studied. Has a lot to share in this space, and apologies for kind of cutting you short there, but I'm trying to keep it kind of in my lane, which is sort of parenting children, father strategies, and obviously children's come in many identities, and for those raising biracial children, just some things to consider and think about. But maybe the Owl Show, we can be on some other forums and panels perhaps, and I can learn more about the history that you're sharing, and we can chop it out and see how this thing unfolds. For those of you listening in, thank you. All right, those of you listening in, thank you so much. If you saw value in it, please give us a like, hit that comment section if you are so feeling so, but also subscribe. I want to grow, like any YouTuber. In fact, I'm in the biracial space because it has some energy and it has some traction. And, I think we're doing some relevant work. And for fathers, please share, let them know there is a space over here where we're having these conversations. We'd love for y'all to be a part of it. All right. On behalf of J4 Conversations, hold on, let me get the rest of these shows. Respect the stream and the chat. That's hybrid. Nah, the interruptions were very polite. Thank you, the Owl Show. I appreciate you, brother. The Owl Show, I just subbed to your channel. Okay. All right, beautiful family. On behalf of J4 Conversations, peace, love. Thank you.